All right. Welcome to episode 30 of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast. This episode, we were joined by Patrick Taylor.
And Patrick Taylor also goes by Taylor. He is a macro-focused social worker and a doctoral social work candidate at the University of Southern California. And he does a lot of work at disrupting this micro pipeline in social work into the clinical realm. So we had a lot of conversations on that and licensure and all those good things.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say the conversation, the dialogue with Taylor was revolutionary and it was important. What the things that Taylor's talking about, this micro pipeline, it's very important. And I think, would you say he calls himself a social work futurist?
Yeah,
Is that what he said?
I like that.
Yeah, I like that, but I think it also encapsulates who I saw him as during our conversation with him. He is part of the future of social work, and so you do well to pay attention to him and listen to what he has to say. You know, one of the biggest things that I hear from social work students when they come into several different social work programs is that they were very interested in macro work and they're surprised at how little the focus is both in BSW and MSW programs. So I just wanted to say it's important. I want to express appreciation to Taylor for taking the time to talk to us. I hope you enjoy the episode as much as we did. Peace.
Peace.
Hey, listen, we got some things that we gotta discuss, how we can affect the system and make it better for us. But first, we gotta start with the man in the mirror. Open your third eye and the vision's gonna be much clearer. We are revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute, but those who pollute the minds of many. Revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute on those who pollute the minds of many, y'all. This is the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, y'all.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Alicia, and I'm here with Ace this morning. And we are blessed with our guest, Patrick Taylor. How are you doing, Taylor?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Good. We're doing pretty good. Getting started. It's morning time for us in Hawaii. Afternoon for you. And where are you located again?
I'm currently in Louisiana.
Louisiana. Yeah. So different sides of the states, but yeah, it's a good day. So we're going to be getting into all kinds of things today. If anyone's out there in the chat, say hi. Feel free to drop any questions as we go along. How are you doing today, Ace?
I'm doing pretty good. Just hard to complain being here in Hawaii and having the opportunity to spend a little time, share some space with you two.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So Taylor is a fellow HPU, Hawaii Pacific University alumni. So I was very excited to hear about that. I'm also an HPU alumni and an LCSW. And we haven't got to know each other so much yet. So I think maybe, Taylor, if you can just introduce yourself, let us know, the audience know who you are, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, thanks for having me. It's definitely a privilege to be here on your show. My name, a full name, Patrick Taylor. I go by Taylor. I go by my last name. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a veteran. I'm currently a doctoral student at the University of Southern California. And right now, a lot of my work focuses around my research on what I call the micropipeline of social work. And what that is a systemic pattern that funnels the majority of social workers into clinical or direct service roles, often at the expense of macro practice like policy, advocacy, and systems change. Outside of that, I have a wide array of experiences. I'm definitely a jack of all trades. I have experience in things like construction. My undergrad was in sociology. When I was in the military, I was a communications technician and then cross-trained into pharmacy tech. And I'm a creative artist, first and foremost. So I've been very fortunate to find ways to implement these different aspects of my life into my social work career, just to give a little bit about my background.
Awesome. So construction and art too. I didn't realize all of that. That's very different, areas to get into.
For sure.
Wow.
I'm not the type to, I guess, stifle myself in regards to exploration. It's probably why I like to travel a lot. It's probably why I'm very open-minded of different cultures and ideas around collaboration. Though construction was interesting, I did learn things from it.
Mm-hmm.
How to work together, how to build. And I think those are concepts that still very much resonate with what I do today.
Yeah. I think that's an awesome part about social work is there's a lot of times where individuals, we all have different passions, backgrounds, and come to social works from different areas. But there is a lot of opportunity to use those skills in social work, whether it be clinical social work, macro social work, and we'll get into more of that. But yeah, it's a field that you can really just use a lot of those skills. And I think for you too, you've tried to get out of social work multiple times, pull back in, but you have so many skills outside of the field that benefit you.
Yeah, absolutely.
This micro pipeline into social work. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about that, but also how did it get to this point? Because there's obviously a story there that got you interested in this pipeline that's going on. So can you just give us a little bit more background there?
Yeah, of course. So it's super important to know that this focus or study is not even a year old. I came up with the idea back in December, and my doctoral program is not unheard of for you to pivot from one idea to another. And I started out with two other ideas. One was to focus on veterans who serve in our military who are located in the federally associated states like Palau, Micronesia, and we have veterans that separate themselves from our military and then they go back home, but then they don't have access to VA benefits and stuff like that. They have to fly to Hawaii because it's the closest VA. So I wanted to focus on that. Then I wanted to focus on children and growing emotional intelligence. Those two ideas, though, something to definitely work towards and work on are more long-term. And I wouldn't have any type of innovative solution or prototype by the end of my doctoral study. And so in December, I had to really think about what we're doing in our doctoral program. And what I've learned a lot about, first and foremost, is the grand challenges of social work. For anybody listening in, the grand challenges of social work is a series of initiatives that social work is currently engaged in to address systemic issues, problems that aren't easily resolved, but they are a point of focus that allows us to kind of find areas to collaborate in and focus in our efforts to address these issues. Things like close the health gap or end homelessness or eradicate isolation. Those are some of the grand challenges. But what I've learned is that only a small percentage of social work go into doctoral degrees.
Mm-hmm.
The grand challenges were here when I was in my MSW program. I feel like this was something I should have learned in my MSW program. I was very much macro focused when I went to my MSW program. But when I came out, by the time I came out, I shifted to, well, maybe I should go clinical and then eventually move into a macro space. So I'm thinking about all these things and how minimal the macro space is for social workers, or how minimally we occupy that space, I should say. And in order to address these systemic issues, we can't have a minimal occupancy within the macro space where we're all siloed and there's no support or experience and a lack of, social work, collaboration, and community within the macro space. And so I thought to myself, why am I trying to focus on something outside of social work when there are problems within the profession itself?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought about it. I was like, if we're going to address these problems, we need to make sure that we have enough social workers in this space to address these issues. So that journey began. I started really researching because I didn't know if anybody else saw this as a problem. There was plenty of research that said it was a problem, but it was decades old and it seemed to just be a continuation of research after research, but nothing actionable, nothing implementable or anything like that. So I started my study. I started doing interviews. I did a design lab and got together a bunch of stakeholders regarding the issue of the micropipeline in social work and really discussing, hey, do you see this as a problem? If it is a problem, what have you thought about as far as the solution is concerned, and what is working, what's not working, and how can we move forward? And so that brings us to where we are today. I've gotten a lot of traction and a lot of engagement with this topic, but it's not even a year old. It'll be a year old in December.
I really appreciate that. And it makes me think of my own story. And it's interesting how all of our stories kind of intersect through HPU and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And we can maybe get into that later. But when I went into my MSW I started at HPU, but I ended up over at University of Hawaii at Manoa to finish. I had these high aspirations, like for what I thought grad school was, what an MSW program was, and what we were supposed to learn, and the way that I thought it might go down. I thought we're going to be learning these new ideas and these new ways of thinking or looking at social work and these theories and whatnot. And if I could fast forward just a little bit, at the end of our cohort, we were split into cohorts, and we had a class at the end where we all had an opportunity to stand up and talk about what we had learned in the program. And most of the other students, they had great things to say about their practicum, about their experience. And for me, the only thing that I could think to say was to be, and I'm too honest sometimes, but I stood up there and I said, I learned that I didn't want to be a social worker anymore. And it was because I felt like that they were either trying to funnel me into being a clinician, a therapist, or a caseworker. And to go back a little bit, to rewind even further, when I started my undergraduate, like 4 or 5 years before that, it felt like macro and micro were placed on a more equal footing. They were up there when they talked about them, like there's micro work and there's macro work, like some that they have equal parts or close to it at least. And so I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, do you have, when you've looked into this further, what does the timeline look like? Has this been something that's in the last decade that we've transitioned over to this, emphasis on micro and clinical work and case management? When, when did it start, or when did that transition start to shift?
Yeah, for sure. So the shift is decades old. There was a move to make social work more legitimate. So we transitioned from, this very system focused work to psychotherapy. It was a way to ensure that we had legitimacy in spaces as a social worker. And I think the intention was good. I think that it made sense for where social work was at the time. As time progressed, I'm hard pressed to find someone who doesn't have a misconception about social work, either before you get into the career field or after you get into the career field. Many before you get into the career field, to include myself, I thought social workers were CPS workers. Everyone who told me to go into social work, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I even had a very short-sighted interpretation of what CPS was, where you just take people's children away, which is how it was portrayed in media. That's just how I saw social work. But after I got in, and I've learned a lot about the many different avenues. That's one of the reasons why I love social work, is because there's a place for social work in nearly every industry, if not all of them. And I've always been a very eclectic individual who wants to do different things and grow. But I keep running into the same dialogue by social workers who think that social work is clinical only. I've had discussions with individuals who were in classrooms and they expressed their goals to be in certain spaces that weren't traditional social work. And those with a clinical focus would ask, why are you in social work? That's a scary conversation. I think that one individual I talked with was very much like you and shifted gears immediately after their BSW and went into a whole other career field, because it wasn't lining up with what she wanted to do. But yeah, that it started way back when. I wish I had the date in front of me, but if you look at social work history, you'll see that it's a decades old issue. And today, at least our latest study shows that over 80% of our social workers are in clinical spaces or direct practice spaces, while only about a little over 7% are in macro spaces. Again, completely siloed, but they exist. And then everything in between is, that meso supervisor, organizational roles.
That's a huge number, 80% in clinical spaces. And I'm originally from the UK, but I've been away from it for so long, and I've never actually practiced social work in the UK. But when we've talked to, who is it that we talked to from Abid? So he was explaining and just reminding me that social work in the UK is still very much more meso macro rather than so micro. And social workers, usually if you're going to go see a therapist, they're not so much social workers, they're more psychologists. Whereas in America, we've got to this point where LCSWs are very sought after, and Medicare even prioritizes reimbursing LCSWs for seeing their patients. And so I always go back to my kind of skeptical brain is like, what is this? Is there some financial gain there that comes from funneling us into clinical work? Because then they charge a lot of money to see us, right? And I always wonder where that's at. I don't know if you found any research in that area.
Yeah, I've kind of dabbled in that area. Nothing definitive, but I do know that the differences between how social work operates in different locations. You mentioned the UK. I am aware that they are more. I didn't see the meso part, but I did see that they were more macro focused, and I
Yeah.
was wondering why. But it seems to me that it comes down to a lot of different things. It comes down to structure, right? We know how to, everything within a clinical track, or if you take that clinical or direct practice approach, everything is billable. Um,
Yeah.
and there's no, I guess, way to measure or bill for social work in another field or a different field. And there are those who argue that if we want to go into, let's say, law, or if we want to go into policy or anything like that, that we should change our trajectory. There's also dialogue about the economic stability of clinical practice versus any other practice. There's a huge belief that you're going to make a, a living wage if you take the clinical route. And that is true. However, they don't give you the whole story. If you were to go into, let's say, become a policy analyst, you'd be making the same amount of money that an LCSW would be making for a clinical position at entry level. Now, at LCSW, their growth is usually from experience. The more experience you have, the higher pay you can ask for and negotiate for. A policy analyst, not so much. But the difference is the policy analyst has growth opportunities. They don't just stay as a policy analyst. They can turn into a senior analyst. Then they can turn to a director. Then they can turn to this, that, and the other. There's progression. You're looking at six-figure jobs by the time LCSW finally gets into 70, 80, 90K, salaries. So I think there's a lot as far as the culture and the dialogue, how we talk about clinical, how we talk about macro. Um, and that develops a belief, right? A belief system of social work is clearly clinical, or that is the best route to take. And any other route is going to be full of barriers, difficulties, hardships, and might not help, might not be beneficial in me making a living wage or paying my bills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's great context. I really appreciate you, Taylor, and the work that you're doing. And you asked earlier if it was about the money, and
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, it's all about the money. And I mean, no matter what path you take, that's going to demonstrate how social work has been reduced to these roles, these clinical paths, these micro paths. It's all about the money and where can people earn on top of what the social workers making. And I think it's worthy to look back at education as well, because it starts off there. Social work often talks about evidence based, right? Evidence based practice, and you shouldn't do anything that's not evidence based. Well, if you look at the evidence on how long it takes, how much time you have to participate in a graduate course, for example, how many hours per week it's going to take, and it's going to vary across course. But if you do the math and then you add in the practicum internship and you add in transportation and you add in taking care of your family and maybe you have another job, most people do, not everyone, but I think most social workers have some kind of part-time or full-time job. The math really doesn't add up, you know what I'm saying? And it's not affordable. You're not getting your dollar value. You don't have enough time to effectively really participate in all of those courses the way that you should in a way. And so then, long story short, you get these folks that have, been just working their asses off through their BSW or whatever undergraduate they got, MSW, if they did the advanced standing, then they're looking at 5 courses a semester, plus an internship. And then, so they're burnt out, and then they get out, they graduate with their MSW. And I think that there's probably quite a few people that have similar, maybe not the exact same story as you, but similar stories where they had ideas of what they wanted to do, but then they were convinced that the only way they could really make money to pay off their student loans and to pay their licensing fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is to take one of those high-paying clinical roles, which I think
Mhm.
has lost prestige in the last couple of decades.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I think clinicians were held a little bit to a higher esteem not that long ago,
Yeah.
and now you have this situation that's still developing, I think, but you have this situation where I compare it to this to customer service. You remember back in the days when you used to be able to call a company and talk to somebody from the actual place that they worked,
Hmm.
and they had a direct tie, like Alaska Airlines or something. You call them, you're going to talk to somebody that's probably in Alaska or Seattle, close somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to know, they're going to be connected. And now you're going to get outsourced somewhere, and we know this. We've all been through it with all the companies that we've dealt with. And so then I like to imagine social work, especially clinical work like this, is that if you look at a clinician in like a TV show from the 80s or 90s, they're going to have like this nice little office in their house, and cool people going to be coming over, getting therapy from them and stuff like that. And then I think if you fast forward and look at what social work, clinical social work in the future is, with the, if everybody's familiar with the interstate compact, which most social workers are for, and there's reasons to be for it, definitely. But the way I imagine it going in the future is, a capitalism, corporate power is taking over that. And in the future, instead of having a clinician in Alaska, like if you're in Alaska, that say working with an Upiak, native people in Alaska, very unique group that's going to, require a lot of not cultural competency, but cultural humility and knowledge and things like that. And right now they bring a lot of people in, but at least they're bringing them there, which is, a step up. My imagination of the future is that Inupiaq person in Barrow, Alaska, that's getting therapy when there's not a social worker there, they're going to be in a cubicle in Utah where it's the cheapest place to operate, if that makes sense. And they're going to be doing clinical work right here via a computer. And so I just see capitalism and our current, cultural structure as reducing social work as just a service rather than an art form or a practice. And that's, we talk about revolutionary social work, but I feel like it broadens it back to what social work is supposed to be, something that's value-oriented, value-based. It's a practice. It's an art. It's something that, you could do it in clinical work, but I could practice social work in a variety of different situations, circumstances. That's not always limited to the profession, if you know what I mean.
I don't think your fear is the future, though. Like, that's already happening.
It's here, but I mean, I could just envision that future being like concrete, where when you see a clinician, you're not going to this special place that they've created. You are seeing somebody that's in a cubicle. Like I said, I use Utah because I used to, supervise a treatment center for kids in Utah. And the reason that place existed, we didn't have Utah kids. We had kids from everywhere else. The reason it existed in Utah is because it's cheap and they don't have their, regulatory laws and policies are much more open than other places. And so it allows them to operate. So that's what will happen. Utah wants to make money, right? Utah is all about progress and stuff like that. So they're going to allow people to operate in that capacity through the interstate compact in a cubicle somewhere, delivering therapy to somebody that they have no context for. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what we're headed towards. I mean, that's where we're going now, but that's where we're really going to get to really fast.
Yeah.
Especially, we haven't even talked about this, but incorporating artificial intelligence into the...
right.
I mean, you bring up some
thing.
really good points, and even to tack on, like, just to talk a little bit more about that financial piece, what further reinforces that micro pipeline in social work is the incentives, the financial incentives to go to the clinical field. If you take a particular clinical role, you might be able to, go into a loan forgiveness program. Micro spaces don't have that. We don't. And if you try to, everything from my research has told me that if you want to go into microspace, you're going to have to finance it. You're going to have to find very creative ways to surpass any type of financial barriers. And it seems to be a space that only the fortunate or the privileged are able to really engage in, because there's not a whole lot of loss or sacrifice on that end. They're able to, go through these hardships and still make sure that they're not diminishing too much their quality of life. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying in regards to the capitalism piece. And until we find a way to incentivize all levels of social work, I think that we're going to be stuck in this kind of loop that we can't really escape from.
Yeah.
I think another element too that comes to mind as you're talking, Taylor, is I felt this way for a long time, and I've struggled having these conversations in social work spaces, but I strongly feel that social work stifles creativity. It stifles imaginations. It stifles a different way to look at things. Just like you were saying, somebody comes in, they're looking at something different, a different way of doing things, something bigger, something outside the box, outside the status quo. And what you just said, like the professor is going to come tell them, or somebody, some kind of mentor is going to tell them, hey, you can't do that because you can't afford to do that. You got to pay off your loans. You got to do this. So you need to take this clinical role because, the financial implications of it. But I noticed that in multiple facets of social work, where this imaginative work, creativity, looking to do something different, it's just stifled in so many different ways. And it's been frustrating for me for a long time. And, you always hear that sentiment, right? That you're going into social work, there's no money in social work. And we keep repeating that. And we keep, sometimes those things become, self-fulfilling prophecies. If we talk about it that way, that's the way that it's going to be. And if we don't talk about it in another context or broaden it, then that's going to be our reality, right?
Yeah. But the organizations are making a lot off of social workers. So social workers may not necessarily make the huge incomes everywhere. Some people do. But the organizations, when I see the reimbursements that organizations are getting from our social workers, it's crazy. It's absolute craziness. And then when you talk about creativity, sorry, Taylor, I mean to cut you off. I'll just say one thing.
No, I disagreed with you. That's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah. With creativity, there's when within my team in itself, and I've been in the clinical world for like 10 years now. So it's seeing all of this play out right in front of me. But people want to do certain things with their creative passions and ideas, but it always comes down to the leadership of, is it billable? And if it's not billable, then it doesn't happen. And so just to even down to like groups that we want to run, I run a yoga mindfulness group, and people have to jump through so many hoops. They have to do intakes, they have to do assessments, they have to do a treatment plan because they have Medicaid and it has to be billable. They can't just come and get the benefits of just taking 45 minutes of their day to do yoga, connect their mind, body, spirit, and feel a lot better when they walk out. They have to jump through all of these hoops. And it always comes down to, is it billable? And then organizations are making a lot of profit off of our services.
Yeah, agreed. I often say, the social work, they say we wear a lot of hats, and we do. But for the most part, I look at it like we do more work for less pay. Since we don't have a clear identity, clear definition, you ask two social workers, definition of social work, they'll give you two different answers. And that adds to the dilution of, the who we are. And so there's people who think that case management is very akin to social work. However, most MSW programs don't teach case management. Case management is as simple as you caring and having Google on your phone to look up resources. That's case management. Following up with somebody, a client or a patient that you saw, and you want to make sure that they're doing okay, that's case management. That's not specific to social work. Everybody can do that. But case management is a career field. If you look at all the things that you do in a space, and especially in the clinical space, you provide therapy, you do case management, you help provide resources, you help navigate policies, you do a lot of different jobs. And if you look at how much those jobs individually get paid, you'd probably come up to about $300,000 a year. That's one of the things that I think social work is suffering from. One, we don't talk about money. And two, we don't really advocate for it. A lot of people, what I learned in my MSW was this phrase just kept coming up. So in social work, we don't get into this field to get rich. True story. But I think we do want a living wage. I think that we do need to make sure that we're okay so that we could bring our best selves to any situation. And financial aspect of that is one part of that. But we definitely don't talk about it enough. And I think there's like an idea of altruism that we do for others without wanting anything in return. And that's a very lovely sentiment. But people will take advantage of that. And organizations do. They take advantage of that.
Yeah. And it's exhausting going at it from that way, because we take so much of our own energy and give it to other people. And then if we're not getting anything back and we're struggling, and I think there was a comment in the chat, actually, Tracy saying, I was reflecting on an NASW forum about MSW students struggling more than the populations they serve. And so we're giving all of this, and then you end up in competition for example, like welfare systems, because people aren't on a living wage and they're needing the same sort of resources that the populations they serve are needing. It's a hard position to be in, to sit in that space.
The only time we ever received public assistance, public benefits, was right after we graduated with our MSW.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because we couldn't even afford to take the licensing exam. That was the big thing. Like we graduated with the MSW, and then we didn't have the money to pay for the LSW, which would get us the job, the basic paying job that we needed. And we were having our son, and so we needed WIC and food stamps, and it was so difficult.
Yeah, that's crazy to me. I don't think that this profession specifically, or any really helping profession, should be in a struggling position after graduation. We should be primed to be able to assist other people. And it sounds like your experience was one of hardship. And it's kind of difficult to, I guess, really bring your best self there when there are a lot of problems, personal problems that are bogging you down
Exactly.
and not allowing you to really focus in on what's going on with your clients, patients, or even beyond. Like what's going on with the systems that's bringing them into my office.
Mm-hmm.
To go back just a little bit and talk a little bit also about the creativity part, you're so right. Especially in the clinical space, there's not a whole lot of room for creativity unless, like you said, it's billable. Like you can come up with a modality or an approach, and you can sell it. You can turn it into a CEU, you can turn it into a practice, and you can bill for it. But that's almost the extent of creativity unless you go into private practice. In other fields, and this is why in my current position, I'm running a prevention program for the military. And I have loved this job from the onset because we got to build it from the ground up. It's still in its infancy. It's not even 2 years old. And I get to be as creative as I want to be. There are no true standard operating procedures for how to run this program, except for whenever we're engaged in clinical care, because they already have a policy to maintain those things. And those have to be built, and people have to be involved and stuff like that. And there's a whole treatment plan. But outside of that, the prevention efforts, I get to be as creative as I want to be. I like play therapy, or I feel like it's more of a therapeutic approach. And I bring people in my office who want to vent, who are angry or upset or whatever's going on. And we'll sit there and play video games so that they can feel comfortable and open up and have more of a dialogue with me, as opposed to, that I don't know how familiar you are with the stigma of mental health in the military, but I work for a security forces unit, and the stigma is just very palpable. It is a sign of weakness that they could not handle their problems or deal with their problems. And they feel very vulnerable when they do come into my office. And I can resonate with that because that was my first introduction into mental health when I was in the military, when I sought mental health. It left me feeling very vulnerable, and I contemplated not going back after my first time. I did not like feeling like that. But again, in that space, I'm able to be creative. And so I find ways to make them more comfortable with the idea of help seeking. I try to build that culture of help seeking. And I wouldn't be able to do stuff like that if I was still in a clinical space within an organization, I should say. There would probably be more benefits of being able to implement creativity if I was in a private practice, but that's a retirement plan for me. That's not something I plan on going into anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. And even with private practice, I think um, a lot of times to be as creative as we want to be, we sometimes cannot get reimbursed from insurance, and we have to do private pay, which takes out a whole chunk of people who actually need services and would benefit from the creativity we have to offer. And that's something that I'm always trying to connect with people and find out how they're doing that, because there's always ways. We're very resourceful as social workers anyway. I think there's always ways to get around it, but it's hard, especially when we talk about Medicaid. There's so many stipulations that if you're trying to do something creative, you still have to make it fit into this Medicaid box to provide the services. It's hard.
Yeah, I think that's just been part of who I am, though. I've always been and this is where creativity comes out, because obviously I'm not doing pencil drawings or murals or anything like that, but I've always been a creative, and I want to always implement that in what I do because that's my passion. So everywhere I go to ensure implementation of creativity, even if it is in a clinical space, I try really hard, but I focus on this improvement. I learn the job. I learn what it is that it takes to do the job efficiently and effectively. And then I start identifying gaps. And then I try to look for innovative ways to address those. I can say that it's not always successful. I've been in some clinical spaces where it fell on deaf ears. I've been in some clinical spaces where I had a lot of support and a lot of those ideas came to fruition. But if there's anybody listening who is trying to think of how to be more creative in that space, process improvement is a mindset. Being able to look at something and be engaged in something and learn something so well that you can identify what's it doing well and where it can improve, and trying to pitch those ideas to the powers that be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just going to the chat, I don't want to miss anyone. Charlie was saying the limitations imposed by billing is one of the big reasons I didn't want to be confined to the field of social work, especially because the common practices are based on Euro Western centric research and designed to promote assimilation over long term healing. Yeah.
Charlie's a good example. We were talking about Charlie's was one of my students in the BSW program who, while going through it, determined that he wanted to take a different path and ended up with a multidisciplinary degree, which is also important. I think a lot of folks don't realize too, is that if you're questionable about things, you can always go back to social work through the MSW. You don't have to have a BSW. It prevents you from doing the advanced standing, but you could still go back in another way. But, to even speak a little bit more, tying this into the creativity and everything, is that, I've been teaching for like almost 10 years now, but I've been a full-time professor. This is my fifth year, something like that. Anyways,
Yeah.
somewhere along there. And what I hear from students are these emerging themes that show up, they're showing up today. They show up in every semester, every class that I teach. And I hear students on one hand saying like, look, I came in here and I've been disappointed, not necessarily with like our program or something like that, but that they, like we said, had grander ideas or different ideas for what social work might be, and they felt kind of stifled in that degree. And then on the other hand, when I'm providing those opportunities, when I'm creating the space for people to be themselves and to connect, and say providing multiple options for a final project, so it's not just a paper, but you could, if you think or learn or want to create in a different way, bring that to the table. And so those have been some of the very best projects creative wise, and those students typically thank me for that. And they say, hey, thank you for allowing me to be myself and for providing these opportunities. I haven't necessarily experienced that in other areas of social work as I've been becoming introduced to it through my education. And I think that that's a little bit of a criticism on social work and social work education, but it also just reflects everything else that we're talking about. When do you have the time to be creative if you are going through this MSW advanced standing program, and then as soon as you get out, you got to go and you got to see 30 clients a week because you got to pay your bills and pay off your student loans and everything else. So we're stifling it internally, but just the way that the system is currently set up also stifles it. And then take it one step further, I believe a revolutionary social work value is that social work should be relational. And there's a number of ways that social work education and elsewhere the systems, they kind of defy that. But you can imagine in today's world, in 2025, post-pandemic, you could potentially get your BSW, even an MSW. I'm not as familiar right now with the MSW programs. You can go through a BSW program, online, asynchronous, and really have very little interaction with anybody else. You might do like a substantive post or even like a voice thread or something like that. But you have very little opportunities to actually interact with other human beings and bounce your ideas, share your stories, share your wisdom, your experience, connect, have a coffee or a drink or lunch with somebody after class. So you could potentially go through a whole social work program, which to me, like social work, it should epitomize, being relational.
Yeah.
And you could do it without having any really relational experiences or very, very little. And then that person is expected to be able to go and thrive in a social work environment. They may not even have to talk to anybody.
Yeah. You speak to a lot of things that does cause a lot of problems. And just in general, like the people who are brought into social work, I'm a firm believer that people who become social workers were essentially social workers prior to deciding to make it a profession, but only in the sense of wanting to be helpful, wanting to, resolve or come up with ideas to resolve issues and develop solutions. I think that a lot of things don't really come to fruition until they get into the job field, like conflict. A lot of people that I've run into, as far as the people I've interviewed, people I've worked with, confrontation is not something they're okay with. And there's a lot of parts of social work that is very confrontational, and sometimes it's within the system, sometimes it's with a cohort, and sometimes it's with your clientele or your patients. And you have to find a way to be able to do that, without it becoming this huge escalation or becoming something you avoid because you feel uncomfortable. One of my mentors told me a long time ago that I need to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I have leaned into that heavily because I used to be very people pleasing. I wanted to focus on everybody being happy with whatever I did. and trying to do the best for everybody. And if you didn't like it, then I feel like I did something wrong. But that's not the case. That's more about that individual or that organization or that supervisor than it is about you. As long as you're focused on doing what you're supposed to be doing, that shouldn't be an issue. But unfortunately, a large portion of the social work population are okay with the status quo. They don't want to raise their voice. They don't want to make a fuss. A lot of people are afraid, especially today, are afraid of losing their jobs. So, that's going to prevent them from speaking up or saying anything. And I think today we face a lot of new barriers for sure, especially with our current administration, the things that have been, all the executive orders that's been um, released so far, and
Yeah.
the passing of what's it called, the big beautiful bill. I think that we're just, I think there's a lot of more trepidation, but I think trepidation has been a huge part of social work. Unfortunately, it's been a symptom of not really learning about and engaging in things like confrontation within our education.
Yep. Yep.
The,
And that's a huge part of revolutionary social work, right? Challenging.
yeah, and that person that you're talking about that's being stifled in those areas, that's what I hear from the I don't necessarily want to say the younger, but the newer generation of social workers coming in. They're reflecting everything that you are saying, but it seems that we're just at this, like, we have this big blind spot in social work, and we're unable to see ourselves. You know what I mean? It's like this. It's like in that children's book that we have about the butterfly's dream. The butterfly flies and he's seeing this great world, and he flies down into this little well, and there's a frog in there, and the frog's like, "Aren't you? Isn't this the best place you've ever seen? It's like the biggest place in the world." And the butterfly's reflecting, like, "No, it's not. You have no perspective at all. Like, I flew across the great sea that it can rain for years and it won't even go up a little bit or down, or if it's a drought, it won't go down a little bit." And I feel like that's how social work is that we think that this is the way that it's always been, and that's just the way that it is, but it's not. There's a whole other realm of possibilities out there. And we're just being stifled when we talk about these things, or when we bring them up, or when we have even when you're talking about people that are being critical or they're criticizing something, then they're in social work, often they're seen as the problem. They're the rabble rouser. I've faced that before. You're the rabble rouser because you're bringing up the issue. If you just shut up and deal with it, then there would be no problem. You're the problem for talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is so much of that. Like, people are scared, whether it be in organizations or just generally. Like, if people talk up against bigger social organizations like NASW, then we are seen as why? You're the rabble rousers, like you say. And I also see that there's this, I think you spoke to this a little bit before, Taylor, this like push to have us standardized in order to be seen as more, I don't know, scientific or professional, or more like the psychologists or the psychiatrists. And so they standardize all these things in social work and say it has to be done this way, which pushes us into that box even more and takes away that creativity even more. And I think a lot of people will lean on, well, it has to be this way in order to be billed, or it has to be this way because that's policy. But it takes away the whole spirit of social work,
Yeah.
which, our roots, why we got into this.
And it definitely doesn't have to be that way. I think that if we were to address certain things at that educational level, because if we really look at it, people who are in school, especially if they are on campus or live on campus and they are not with their parents, it's the professors who are very influential. These are the people that these students are looking up to. And when you tell them a clinical path is the way to go, well, they're listening and they're going to follow that advice, because why would you steer them wrong? Why would you tell them anything that's not going to be beneficial to them? And so they're going to follow suit. And again, all of these things we're talking about, they're just elements that reinforces this pipeline. And so if you really if you make yourself aware of all the topics that we've been talking about and all the different facets of this issue, you'll notice how, it's not easily resolved. There's a lot of things that have to change and happen before this pipeline can be disrupted at all. And I think my focus is to make sure that I focus on the MSW level or the educational level, because I think that's where career trajectories are really set. I think it's where field placement, since that's where field placements happen, that's where you're going to get that practical experience to gain the confidence and competency to look for those jobs that you want, or more to the point, look for those jobs that you feel qualified for. And I think a lot of students just don't feel qualified for a lot of the things that they want to do. And so when you separate, I say separate, not the military, when you graduate, you still have a lot more to do, a lot more education to seek. You have to work towards your licensure. Even if you want a job that's not clinical, there's a lot of jobs out there that, and again, this is further legitimizes the LCSW. There are jobs out there that require you to have an LCSW. You have to be able to have supervision, be able to provide supervision. And you don't even, I think that it's like it would be a supervisor position or something like that. And they want you to know everything that the levels below you know, which makes sense to an extent. But you shouldn't need an LCSW to manage or to run an organization. I think that that's a whole other, you probably would get from a business degree or a leadership course or something like that, but not necessarily something you would learn in your MSW or through obtaining your LCS.
Yeah. I always ask that in HPU. I was saying, why is there were no courses or classes on business management or leadership, nothing like that. We had like a policy class, but nothing really to build our own skills in how to be in those spaces, which is really frustrating.
Yeah.
And Christina said, I don't know if you know, Taylor, are there BSW, MSW programs that do focus on macro? Because she's interested in macro social work.
Yes, I am familiar with some, and so I've been able to talk with different educators at different universities to see about, eventually in my program, I have to develop a prototype and implement it somehow. So talking with universities and seeing if they're willing to collaborate with me was one of the first steps I had to take. I recently had a conversation with an educator over at Arizona State University, I should say. And they have one of the most robust macro tracks that I've seen so far. I have, by no means have I talked to every university, but this one aligns a lot with what I want to implement within an MSW program. They have more macro placements than they have macro students. They have educators that teach macro. They have macro panels where professionals will come in and talk to these students and give them a perspective that's not from their educators. And they even have a certification through the network for social work management. I think that's what it's called. And they work with them to provide a management certification that can help them with their CV or their resume to get into those spaces. The issue though is what I found out through that conversation was that this pipeline that I'm talking about is more than just a structural issue, because they have the structure, they have the resources, and yet their macro track is dwindling. People are still going into the clinical field. And so I had to think, even if with all of the structure in place, what is it that is driving these individuals to still go into clinical fields and not even explore this macro? And so I had to explore things like culture. I think that culture plays a huge role into why individuals are still going to clinical. This school talks about and promotes macro practice, but obviously there's a dialogue or a message or influence somewhere else that's letting students know clinical is the way to go. So I think I talked about the media piece a little bit earlier, but you think about social work and media, chances are you can only really attest to seeing a CPS worker and probably not even in a positive light. I often use this reference, Lilo and Stitch. The CPS worker was seen as the antagonist, trying to tear a family apart, which it turns out he wasn't even a CPS worker, but that's neither here nor there. And I think that plays a role, right? That develops a perception of what is this career field from the people who aren't even in it. And then you get into it and you see that the professionals that are available to talk, right? When you type in social work or you look at NASW and see the list of social workers providing supervision or anything like that, they're all clinical. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's not clinical on that list. And I think that that's an issue too, because that is the perception. You go to an organization like NASW to look for guidance for social work, and all they're presenting is all of this microspace, direct practice, clinical stuff. So yeah, I think to answer the question, ASU looks like a wonderful school to go to. I've talked to some students from there as well, and they seem to have come out with a very good understanding of macro, and they've expanded their vision for what social work can be and are in those spaces. So shout out to ASU for that one.
Yeah, and I think another element that we could say here, we could talk about is that sometimes you have to forge your own path. And let's say you're in an MSW program and you have a practicum coordinator or whatever their title is, and they're trying to force you into doing something you don't want to do. Stand up for yourself. I promise you, if you push hard enough, you can typically get them to, adhere to your requests or to look at things differently. So if you want something macro, but they're trying to make you do something different, then push for it and stand up for yourself. You can usually obtain those things. And I had several, I won't detail them here, but I had a couple experiences, both BSW practicum and MSW practicum, where they tried to make me do something I didn't want to do. And I stood up for myself and I was able to get what I needed in order to feel good about what I was doing. Because you think about it, like, I think it ties into Tracy's, and we should get into these chat in just a second so we don't let it get away. But she said, internship, it takes a level of privilege to be in this field as well, to work on top of interning, often unpaid, almost always unpaid, and attending school, yet striving to be actively present in every aspect is true. It's hard to be able to take all these classes, to pay for them, to be able to take an internship for free. And one way that's really flawed is, and I'm a perfect example of it, and I've come across this because these days I have a lot of non-traditional students, people that are coming into the field later on in life with a lot of experience, life experience. And for me, I was a social worker before I even knew what the field of social work was. And I found myself supervising a juvenile treatment center with no formal education. And then I had moved up to Alaska and they grandfathered me into almost a clinical role, essentially, without having an education. And I've been doing that for several years. And so then I get to my senior year and I'm thinking that, hey, they're just going to let me work my job and do my stuff there. And they're like, no, it has to be unpaid and it has to be away from your job. And so I fought against that. And it's one of the ones that I lost. But long story short, I ended up moving to the town where the university was, taking an internship that was less responsibility than I had before, and had to do it for free. It doesn't make any sense. I could have acquired those things at my place of employment, through some extra supervision or something like that. And to make matters worse, I wanted a paid practicum, and they said no. And so I start this internship, and they like me, and they say, "Oh, you're good at working with the hardest clients. Do you think that we can hire you extra and get paid, and you can work some extra hours, and we'll pay you for it?" I said, "Well, they said they won't let me." And she said, "Well, let me call them." And then they let them. So they wouldn't do it for me, but they did it for the practicum agency, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just a losing game. We're putting everyone in shackles that if you have to, I mean, again, different people have different levels of privilege when it comes to money and how you can afford these things. But
Yeah, for sure. And if anybody, just to put this plug out there, if you've never heard of it, look into P4P. It's pay for placement. As far as I'm concerned, it's a movement. And if you go to their website, you can see if your school has a chapter. But the whole idea is advocating for social work students to have paid internships, because it is very real, that particular financial struggle to have to do all of this school and an internship unpaid and still make a living wage. So definitely look into that.
Thank you for
yeah,
that.
I appreciate that. I'm gonna look into that as well. And I will say, to echo what Taylor's saying, is that it is changing, and there's a lot more push towards that right now. And I think most social work educators realize that, even if they're not able to implement it right now, they realize and recognize that flaw in the system that we currently have. So there's a lot of hope. And then again, another comment from Tracy backs that up a little bit. Have the courage to have the hard conversations. We don't just advocate for others, we have to advocate for ourselves. So do it, advocate for yourselves. Like I said, if you don't see a path, then make that path by walking that road on your own, or gather with some like-minded individuals. And it doesn't happen overnight, but I'm telling you, you can forge a new path. Use that imagination. Don't do your best not to be stifled in that regard.
Yeah. And to add on to what Tracy's saying, Tracy, you're absolutely right. I just think that when we use words like advocacy, it falls short in a full understanding that it's something that we can do for ourselves as well. And that's why I use words like confrontation, conflict, challenging. It's because I'm trying to get the individual to focus on the fact that they need to also stand up for themselves. But yes, we have to learn to advocate for ourselves. That's where we're going to be able to find out if we're in the space that we want to be in, and find out just as much as we need to grow, to expand we're not going to get anywhere if we don't speak up. But we'll just be stuck in our status quo, in a rut, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Which epitomizes where social work is at. Stuck in that rut, stuck in that status quo, but we can get out of it together. Monica adds that sometimes we have to have a common commotion. We have to cause a commotion in order to move forward for the better, and that's true. Not always true. Choose your battles. Don't make a commotion where it's not going to benefit you or it's not worth fighting. But for sure, don't stay silent or let things go if it has some potential. Tracy adds,
my professor once told me that. He told me to choose your battles. And I told him I'm going to choose all the battles. I'm a big fan of confrontation. I love it because it invites growth and it invites change and it invites, a perspective. Instead of you talking at me, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to see what we can do.
Absolutely. And I'll just add that a tool that I've used for a long time, I was brought in with an Alaska Native cohort a long time ago, like over a decade ago, and trained in talking circles, taught about talking circles. And all the talking circles I've had over the years in my classes and elsewhere, I've never had an argument in a talking circle. It tends to be whatever it is, I don't have time to explain it now, but whatever it is about performing that ritual of sitting in a circle and talking and listening is that it puts on those deeper listening abilities for folks, no matter who you are. And people typically come out it with a little bit more elevated consciousness and for I think various reasons. It avoids that argumentative agree, disagree, and instead listening and honoring multiple truths and realizing that, hey, if I listen to you, I may not agree with you, but like I could hear you. And hey, maybe over time I'll come a little bit closer to you and you'll come a little bit closer to me, if that makes sense.
And these are things that when we take those skills, practices, rituals into spaces, more macro spaces, they also work, right? Like if you take talking circles into leadership spaces, into policy spaces, and people are able to listen to each other's ideas and sit in uncomfortable positions and have confrontation maybe, but maybe not, just hear each other in dialogue, then you're able to grow there too. And I've seen that firsthand in organizations where something's happened and there's like this tension in the air and people are feeling very uncomfortable. And I've advocated for, we need to sit down in a circle together and like just talk, but it's uncomfortable. But after those times, the tension eases and people are able to grow and move past it. So like, those talking circles, just so many different spaces that can benefit from them.
Yeah. And just to echo what you're both saying, I think that's why we would excel if we were a little bit more balanced at all systems. And I think we would definitely excel at the macro level. In certain spaces, there's a perception of right and wrong or correct or incorrect. And I think that in social work, at least from what I've found, is there can be a conversation. There can be multiple right answers. There can be compromise. And we're, I think, a little bit more amiable than most other professions. And I think if we learn to exercise that in all spaces, I think we would definitely see progress in one way or another, whether it's relational, whether it's organizational structure, whether it's our education system. I think that conversations should be had, especially at the education level. I don't know if any MSW students listening or early graduates and early social work professionals, y'all are what I've identified as the invisible voices in the problem that I'm studying. I've interviewed a lot, and all of them had a lot to say on the topic. They're naming the pipeline. Your voice isn't echoed in research. It isn't echoed when we talk about what do the students want, right? Things are happening, it's much like how the administration is affecting us now. Things are happening to us without our say, right? You are the stakeholders in the situation that are directly impacted because of how your education is going. And that informs the trajectory you're going to go on once you graduate, unless you have the mind to fight it and take a different path. But we need to have these conversations with everyone involved. I think, so what I've learned is it's called community-based participatory research, and it requires having a conversation with all stakeholders. That's what my design lab was. I had a conversation with practitioners, with educators, with people who were macro inclined, with people who preferred the clinical route. I've had conversations with students in that same room, and we all were enlightened by the different things that we didn't know. from the different perspectives. And through that conversation, we were able to develop ideas of solutions that were innovative, that, we didn't touch on or think about because we didn't know everybody's perspective individually. But we did learn about it once we had that conversation.
Yeah, there's so many things I think we could touch on. It makes me think what you're saying. It makes me think of Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator from back in the days, wrote the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But he brings in what he calls the banking model of education. This idea that education is where I'm the professor and you're going to come in here and I'm going to give you the goods and you're going to take it and I'm going to give you an exam, right? It's a transfer instead of something that's collective or relational. And social work often falls into that, right? So in social work, we're like that as well. It becomes this, idea of a transaction rather than something where when you come to your education, you're a part of it. You have something to contribute. You know what I'm saying? There's no rigid roles like that. So I think, for those of us, Paulo Freire is not often talked about in social work circles, more in education pedagogy. But if you're a social worker, I encourage you to go read the first chapter of Pedagogy of the Oppressed and think about it in social work terms, and you'll see some of the ways that that's synchronized. And it also makes me think about this in recovery and substance abuse recovery, addiction recovery, right? When you go to you go to an Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous meeting, they often end with the serenity prayer. And I bring this up often. They say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there's a lot of value in that because, it's humility and it lets you know, hey, I can't change everything. I need to accept that. However, sometimes I think that puts us as that frog in the well. And we think that, hey, this is just the way that things are. And I don't see anything different because I'm not even looking, because I'm just accepting that that's the way that they are. And I had in my MSW, Angela Davis guest taught our course for the semester. And she would say, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I can no longer accept. And that's what I would encourage everybody, but social work students. If you see something that you don't accept, that doesn't make sense to you, that you can't accept, don't accept it. Stand up for yourself. Stand up for what you believe in. Look a little deeper. Create that conflict like Taylor's talking about, because you can change things. It's the big illusion that we can't change. You may not change whether the sun comes out tomorrow. You may not change whether Donald Trump is president right now, but you can change a hell of a lot of things that you're basically hoodwinked into thinking that, hey, I can't do anything about this. So, I encourage people, have humility about things. Know that you can't change everything, but there's a lot more that you can change, especially about yourself and the way that that we encounter things, the way that we respond to things. And we can change things on a system level as well. But you can't do it if you're not even thinking about it, if it's stifled from the very beginning.
And that just takes a little bit of reframing. That is a constant practice in my day-to-day, reframing my mindset. I learned a long time ago that I did not subscribe to the idea of it is what it is, or that's the way the cookie crumbles, or that's the nature of the beast. As far as I'm concerned, if that's the way the cookie crumbles, we need to change the recipe. If that's the nature of the beast, we need to tame the beast. If that's the way it is, we need to change the way it is so that it's reflective of what it should be, or what it needs to be.
Yeah. And you speak exactly to what Tracy was saying, where she said she had a previous employer say, you're always arguing. She said, I'm not arguing, I'm advocating. I'm challenging that this is how it's always been, because obviously it's no longer working. It's time to lean into these third place solutions. And yeah, I think people are scared about the repercussions and retaliation. And I've seen it happen where people challenge what's been, and they're no longer working there anymore. And so people see that and there's fear and anxiety around it. But yeah, I mean, we shouldn't stop. That's not a reason to stop. Although it is a little scary because it's tied to living, and our finances.
And I would like to think, I mean, maybe this isn't true everywhere. I would just like to think that social work is such a community and where we would support each other in those spaces. If someone is removed because they are being critical or speaking up, I don't know how your chapters, your organizational chapters in your state are, but hopefully they are supportive and assisting you in those times. Or if you have a cohort that you can rely on, or anything like that. What I've learned in social work is it's not something anyone can do alone, and we have to learn to lean on each other. And I think that is super important, especially when you are advocating or speaking up for something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's we got a lot of comments in here, so let's just go through this chat so that we can make sure we honor everybody, and then we'll come back and we'll talk. We've been critiquing a lot, but I think we should close with, what we're for and what we can do about these
Yeah.
about some of this stuff. But Monica adds, I know that my education won't end with the BSW. However, I struggle with justifying the benefit value of an MSW program, especially as a non-traditional student with prior employment experience. I hear this reflected from a lot of students, and I've heard Monica reflect this as well. You don't have anything you want to speak to that?
No, well, I think Taylor's said it quite well that there are still spaces that you can get into out of that, but then there's that balance of there's when you look at those spaces, sometimes they're asking for that MSW and that LCSW. So yeah, I don't know if you have more on that, Taylor.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a valid point, and that's exactly why I'm focused on what I'm focusing on in my study. It's because I fear for the social work profession. I fear that people are going to start noticing that, or coming to a realization that there is no value in MSW, that you're going to be able to better get into the spaces you want to get into and get the education that you want, get the skills that you want by changing trajectories. That is a genuine fear of mine because I love this profession and I love what social work stands for. I think that there's nothing I can tell you to really bring you back into the fold because the way things are right now, I think there is just not a lot of safe space for a social worker. I'm currently a federal social worker. I think the only reason I still have a job is because they haven't put the fact that DEI and social work are one and the same. So I'm just going to, keep riding that train. I think that you have to make the decision for yourself and you have to find out what is going to be more valuable to you. And that requires research. Look into the MSW program and see if it's going to provide you with what you want to be provided with. And you sound very insightful. I would imagine you probably have some pretty good questions that you can ask whoever interviews you for these programs, or if they want you to write something with your application, finding ways to explore if this MSW program is going to serve your needs or not will probably help you best in making your decision on how to move forward.
Yeah. And I would also say, there are a lot of different programs that offer combinations of like law and social work, business management, social work. There's different things that you can look at and interdisciplinary departments as well, and kind of putting your own degree together. So I think just being creative. I always go back to like, we have so many skills and resourcefulness and just ways of imagining things that we need to do that, turn it inward and just be creative about looking for these things and creating it yourself. I think you've probably seen from students too, when you ask and you try and figure out what you're imagining and putting it into practice, it works out sometimes. So don't stifle yourself, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I would agree. And yeah, dual degree programs is definitely part of that landscape.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to it as well. And there's, a whole aspect of privilege there too, because unfortunately it's not folded into your MSW education. You have to go to two schools, right? Like for a JD, you have to go to MSW and you have to also go to law school. But yes, that is part of the solution landscape. And it, again, well intentioned. My only concern is that just further dilutes the social worker and the title. There's a lot of people who I've talked to who won't even use the social work title because of how the profession perceives social work. And so they'll use another title more aligned with whatever their other program is, like MPH or something like that.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh because so often, you get asked, what do you do? Like, oh, I'm a professor. Or what? Social work. And I always get the look like, social work. Oh.
Yep.
Anyways.
You go back to the chat.
Yeah, Alice says, I'm also a non-traditional student. I would have you think about your career in 30 years and think about where you want to be then. I'm planning my retirement career. It doesn't have to be achieved sequentially. It can be achieved in parts. And I appreciate you, Alice. And I think Alice is also, one of the non-traditional students that I'm talking about that's coming to her education with a wealth of life experience and knowledge and wisdom. And the things that we're talking about, I think, apply very well to Alice and people like Alice, the non-traditional students, especially those coming in, like, say, in a retirement career, like LA, for example, people that are coming in later in life and they're doing social work not necessarily as a way to, bring the bank home, but because it's part of who they value themselves as a person to be. And they're going into this field to make a difference for themselves and for other people. And then, they get caught up in this convoluted mess of what you have to do to get there. You know what I'm saying? Where their experience isn't necessarily valued or there's no way to apply that to your degree, and there should be.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like an 18-year-old student, 19-year-old student versus somebody who's 50, 60 years old, even 30, 40, 50. Like there's a big difference there. And I'm not dissing you young folks. What I'm saying is that if somebody comes to education with a wealth of experience and sometimes professional experience, then we need to find ways to honor that and to be able to make that fit for them. So, you don't have to create a special place for Alice to share her perspective or to get it fit in. Like it's already there and it's already inclusive in that way. Social work often talks about diversity and inclusion and things like that, but I think we miss the mark when it comes to like when we step outside of race and the gender and things like that, and we get into something like age or experience or thinking outside of the box or different kinds of experience. We don't value that. I went to the NASW conference last in June, a couple months ago now, and it was really good. And there was a lot of social work spirit and unity and showing up for each other. But I didn't see any indigenous elders. I didn't see anybody leading from like an Afrocentric worldview or an indigenous worldview. I didn't see that. It was all
Right.
for the most part within the status quo, and we've got to find a way to broaden that somehow. Why are we not valuing elders in social work? I'm not saying nobody does. I'm just saying in general, these things we talk about marginalization, but we literally marginalize them over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally agree. And I think when we talk about what we are for, Tracy pulled from our conversation on advocating, and even if we don't get the outcome you want in the moment, you're setting a pathway forward, and then it's documented, and now then someone else speaks up, there will be a pattern. Enough advocating will elicit change. And so like the more and more that we do speak up and we challenge, we are setting precedent for people coming behind us. And we have to remember that how important that is as well.
Yep. I think the idea of planting the seed is very very much real in that sense. That it's probably not your job to cultivate it. It's probably not your job to watch it grow or manage it or produce anything. But perhaps it is your role to plant the seed.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And remember, sometimes planting a seed, almost always planting a seed, you don't get the instant gratification. You got to give it some time and some space. You got to water it and you got to let it grow. So be patient, persistent. Tracy's adds on to our conversation earlier. Even if you don't get your desired outcome.
Oh, that's what I just said.
Oh, you read that? Sorry.
That was the one.
But I just wanted to add this is that we've talked about like pay negotiation and things in here. I think maybe the last podcast.
Yeah.
And Tracy was involved in that as well. And I saw a video recently that at first I didn't like it. And then I listened to the whole thing and said, oh yeah, he makes a good point. And he was talking about asking for a raise. And so a lot of people come in and they say, hey, I need this, this is what I need, and can you give it to me or not? Essentially in one way or another. And he was saying like, look, especially in fields like social work, you should take a different approach and you should show up and you should say, hey, look, what I really need to be successful in this job is A, B, and C. Can you help me get there? And then oftentimes they'll just award it to you just like you had asked for it originally, but it's asking for a pathway instead of saying like, hey, I need exactly this. It demonstrates what you need. And does that make sense? So it's more of asking for help finding a path to what you need versus saying like, if I don't get this, then I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And it gives you more negotiation leverage, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's more collaborative too.
As it should be.
Yeah, it really should be.
Kimberly asks, how do we hear more about the research on the invisible voices?
Outside of this space, I'm doing a lot in regards to trying to get this out. If you want, I've written a lot of pieces that I've published on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn to read more about kind of what I'm focused on with my pieces. And some of it is just to bring light to the micropipeline of social work. Some of it is just to bring light to some of the issues within social work that perpetuate that pipeline and the like. I also put out posts and stuff like that to educate and to promote macro practice. I'm also in the process of writing a chapter for an academic book. I sent my proposal and it was accepted. So eventually,
Great.
this will be a topic that is within academia. I've also submitted a proposal to an upcoming symposium that I want this message to be out there as well. Even though this is my study for my DSW program, I truly believe this is going to outlive my graduation. This is something I'm going to be focused on for years to come. And so I've started looking into long-term solutions, short-term solutions, both structurally and culturally. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with anybody interested in the topic. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. And if anything resonates with you, you can just send me a DM. I'll be happy to schedule a meeting with anybody.
And if you're listening, I'll put I'll link your LinkedIn into the description so that if folks are listening to this, and make it easy to find. And then when you get that chapter published, let me know, because I'd like to incorporate that into some part of my curriculum. So make sure you pass that on.
Will do.
That's what it's about.
Yeah. Congratulations on all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's exciting. It's just overwhelming. There's a lot going on, and I'm trying to really prioritize and focus on what needs to happen right now versus what I can put off until later. But I'm just happy to see that my study resonates with so many people. And I invite anybody, even if you challenge, again, I invite challenge, I invite confrontation. If there's something you don't like about what I'm doing, chances are you're probably a stakeholder in this matter, and your voice also matters. So I want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, all the voices. And Charlie had one other question. What suggestions do you all have for students and new grads to find, renew, and or maintain hope in the social, economic, and political state we're finding ourselves in? And Tracy says, Charlie, stay connected with community. Anything else that you would add to that, Taylor?
Yeah, staying connected with community is paramount. I think that, especially, speak with someone older in the field, and they will tell you about the time during Reagan era, where a lot of things reflected much of what's happening today. I think that there's a lot of older people who are unconcerned because this has happened before, and they are of the belief that this is going to pass, that this is not going to be forever. As a younger social worker who has not experienced anything like this before, it is, disconcerting to see where we are. And as somebody who's a social worker who has, kind of wanted to constantly working towards equity and, making sure that we have representation and wanting to protect the rights of people and stuff like that. Where we're going is setting us back so far. It's going to, a recent paper said that it's going to take decades to restore a lot of the things that were dismantled with this administration. And so I think that you shouldn't lose hope. I think you should look to those older social workers who are holding on to hope, but specifically because of their lived experiences. And I think that, you definitely should maintain community. Again, as a social worker, we need to learn to lean on each other and rely on each other. And through our efforts, collaborative effort, I think we can do anything, honestly. I think that we are stronger in numbers. That's where we're going to see the change, and that's where we're going to get our protections from.
Yes. And I think with revolutionary social work, to be a revolutionary social worker, as we've seen, it's very much in the profession, but also outside of the profession. And I really enjoyed the conversations we've had with so many different people who are aligned in our values and the vision for this future that we're all talking about, not necessarily social workers. And I think that's really helped me, Charlie, to maintain hope and find alignment with just people all across the spectrum of whatever work they're doing, but they're doing revolutionary social work. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, I'd say, and that goes on with what Tracy said right after too, leaning into your own values and finding spaces where they are shared. Personally, I'm finding so much power and alignment. And I'd say a couple things about that. One is many of us don't know what our values are. We might have ideas kind of, and we may have something, but we don't know. Think about it, reflect on it, write your values down. Imagine how you might be able to embody them in the ways that you make your decisions, the way you operate as a human, as a social worker, all of that. And then you can find people, because how can you align with people if you don't know what your values are? Like I said, you may have a general idea, but know exactly what your values are. It took me 40 years to get there, so don't feel like you gotta rush. But Charlie, just speaking to you directly, come visit us in Hawaii. Sounds like you got that on the radar. Connect with things like revolutionary social work, people with the values. One thing that we're trying to do, not trying to do, but we got it on the radar coming up, is having talking circles, not just for my students, but for a larger group of social workers, revolutionary social workers, to gather and convene and to have deeper conversations just like this.
Yep.
Push the boundaries, reach out to someone like Taylor on LinkedIn. This is the last thing I just wanted to say, is that LinkedIn is very cringeworthy in so many ways. However, I have found that it's probably the best venue for connecting with professional social workers and having ideas. If you can get through all the cringe and all of that, then you can make real connections. And I've made several, including Taylor. And so give it a shot. Ignore the cringe, look past it, and use it as a way to connect and share ideas.
Yeah, I can attest. I definitely don't use it to doom scroll. I don't use it for that purpose. I am connected to a group called Macro Social Workers United. That group has been very instrumental in me connecting with other macro-focused social workers or those interested in the macro field. And through the meetings we've had, and we're developing initiatives to address certain issues, it's a collaborative effort. And I would have never learned of it unless I spoke up about, one, this topic, and two, talked about this topic in spaces like LinkedIn and other social media platforms.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've learned through the podcast, just generally the work that we're doing, is that the more that we go at it, the more meaningful the connections and the relationships become. So when you're first starting out with, trying to figure these things out, the connections might feel kind of shallow. But the more that people get to know each other and all of that, the people that reach out to us now, the connections are deep and they're significant and they hold a lot of value, just as epitomized by Taylor. But with a lot of the folks that we've connected with, Mark Tuggle, brother KD, all sorts of people that we've connected with just because we're out there on putting it out there and having LinkedIn's a good venue, like I said, as far as like being able to put it out there, and it provides a lot of ways that you can connect with each other.
Yeah.
And support and uplift each other as well. You can get on there and you can, if you, and what Tracy's talking about, if you align with somebody in values, then uplift them. We don't do that always very well as social work. Uplift them, uplift those ideas. Make sure that you're sharing them, that you're letting people know that you're listening, that you see it. I think those are some of the best ways that we can
Agreed.
stay connected.
Yeah, totally.
And I think one thing that like, go post some drama on Facebook or LinkedIn, and it'll get a lot of likes. And you post something for like mutual aid, and it's
Yeah, that's telling. That's very telling. And I just wanted to touch lastly on Jesse saying, I think there needs to be an organization developed for these issues that can help advocate and also educate students, and a place of community for them. And Jesse, that's really what one of the things we're trying to do with revolutionary social work. And I do encourage everybody to go to the website, revolutionarysocialwork.com, sign up for the mailing list, because we're going to, in our newsletter, we're going to be putting out like Taylor's work and other people's work that you can then find education and support and community from. So I do encourage people to do that so we can all stay connected as a community. Yeah. But this has been great.
It's been a great conversation. I think it's a good way to circle back to what I was talking about some of the things that we're for. So Jesse mentions an organization, and that's hard to do, right? It's hard to build up. NASW and CSW, they've been around for a long time, and they got a lot of power, and have kind of boxed themselves in within that power. And so we do need something different, or different things.
And finding out what those are, I'm very well versed in the different things that exist. There are macro organizations, believe it or not. And I'd be more than happy to share those with anybody interested. Again, thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to get this message out there. I think it's very important message that we need to reevaluate social work from the in out so that we can be the most effective across all levels.
Yeah. We appreciate you, Taylor.
I wanted to leave with one last question. If you were to, the miracle question, if you were to close your eyes and you were to imagine social work, adopting and implementing the ideas that you have, and we were to go 5 years, 10 years, whatever you want to say, what would social work look like for you?
A very good question, and it is something that I have already envisioned. One, there would be balance across all fields. I think that we would have more of a macro presence. I think that our organizations that exist wouldn't just seem supportive of the clinical side of social work, but supportive of all social workers. I think that we would be found in places like policy, like, it's it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine a social worker running for office. I think that there's a lot of, I think that in this imaginative state, that we would have macro licensure, a very legitimate path towards macro practice that you can choose between. If you and if even if you did go clinical, you'd be able to know there's a macro path you can take, and you can find a clear road into this field, as opposed to trying to piece it together. I think in this we would be able to address systemic issues. It wouldn't be identified as intractable, wicked problems that are unsolvable. These would be issues that we could tackle, and we'd be able to do it at all levels. There would be social workers in clinical spaces that would feel very comfortable with reaching out to social workers that are in those macro spaces, to find out what can be done about what's bringing these individuals into my office in the first place. So that's what I envision. I hope to be able to live to see that.
Yeah. Well, I believe that you did the work that you're doing, talking about it, and putting it out there this way. That's planting the seeds, my friend, and that's the power of manifestation. And so I hope that I'm standing there with you next year, down the road and looking at that reality together. I just want to say I appreciate you, Taylor. Much respect to all the work that you do. Thank you, mahalo. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope that we can continue the conversation as we move forward together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Echo that. And I just appreciate everybody in the chat as well, been contributing. I always love it when we have the questions coming through. So
yeah, I just want to say thanks, Alice, Tracy, Jesse, Monica, Kimberly, Charlie. If I missed anybody, then I didn't mean to.
Avalon.
Yeah, your contributions make these conversations, these podcast episodes, I mean, they revolutionize it to a whole nother level. It's really invaluable. So please keep coming. Please keep sharing the space with us.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
You have any last words, Taylor?
Oh, no, just again, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to having more conversations with y'all in the future.
Absolutely. We will make it happen. All right, everybody. That's it for now. We'll get this up and produced in the next couple weeks, and we'll see you on the next one. Appreciate you all. And thanks again, Taylor.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
You've been listening to the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, and we just want to say thank you for your continued support. You can catch us on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share our content with the world. But most of all, never forget to keep being revolutionary. Peace.